conducting the interview. I'm not the guest of honor, just to make that clear. One afternoon in the late 70s, I walked into a shop in San Francisco that's called The Magazine, one of our favorite shops, and self-finished magazines. Naturally, I picked up some pulps. And
I should point out that the main merchandise of the magazine is scatological. Dirty magazines, that's what they specialize in. The pulps are under the counter.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Well, anyway, I was being rung up, and the cashier said, if you're interested in pulps, you ought to go talk to that fellow. And he pointed out another customer, and it was Frank Robinson. And I went over there, we spoke and had a brief conversation. He did give me some good tips on where to get pulps, probably places he'd already shaken down already. And the cashier had said to me, Frank Robinson knows all about the pulps. Well, I crossed paths with him again in the 80s, years later, and as I got to know him, I discovered that Frank had been a lifelong fan and collector, had worked for a pulp publisher, had written for the pulps, became an editor, although not for pulps, and later had a career, and then later in his career wrote about the pulps to come full circle. So I think we'd be hard-pressed to find someone who comes to the pulp field from more angles than Frank does.
The way I remember it was, I was at a convention and I was selling some of my duplicates, and there was this kid trying to shake me down for some old weird tales. He's trying to get them for $10 and I was selling them for 15. As long as I've known John, he's been the same guy. He hasn't changed for better.
Wasn't that John Denny? Oh. Well, anyway, Frank, welcome back to Chicago.
I was glad to leave.
I understand you're from around here.
Yeah.
And how did you get interested in the pulps?
Into the pulps?
Yeah.
I was a science fiction buff, and when I was very young, I read all the Burroughs books and the various colored books of fairy tales, the violet book, the green book, the red book of fairy tales. Read Wells and Verne, and when I got a little bit older, one of my brothers was a great reader of sports stories. And he used to send me to the local secondhand magazine store. There used to be a lot more than just the one secondhand magazine store in Dayton, Ohio. There used to be dozens of them. But my brother read sports stories and he used to send me there and said, pick me up a couple of sports story magazines. And occasionally I would sneak in an Argosy or a Blue Book that had a sports story cover. And then one day he gave me a quarter, and I went to the store and I stumbled into Astounding Science Fiction. And it was the February and the April 1939 issues of Astounding. There were 2 for a quarter. So that's what I got. I thought for sure that since I would like them a lot, that he would like them a lot. And I got home and he pounded me once or twice and threatened to throttle me for wasting his money. But I became a big science fiction fan after that. And I saved everything that I read. I read Astounding. I loved Astounding. I used to read Amazing, but I would never admit that to anybody. Charlie Beaumont, who was a childhood friend of mine, he was a big Amazing Stories fan, and I would look down upon Charlie because it's obvious that he was reading the low price spread, and I was the intellectual in the group. I met a group of fellow fans, And there was Walt Leacher, Neil DeJack, Howard Punk, names that mean nothing to any of you. But one day we were out scouting magazines, and we ran into this magazine store on the south side of Chicago. And back then you'd go into a secondhand magazine store and they had Life and Look and the National Geographic against the walls. All the tables were covered with pulps. All of them in very nice shape.
Thousands of them?
Thousands of them. And we were at the front table leafing through a stack of, I think it was a Shadow and Savage and Spider and all of that. And somebody points to a glass cabinet at the back and says, "Look, old science fiction magazines." Whereupon we dropped the guy's merchandise on the floor, literally just, and ran running to the glass cabinet and back. Well, he got pissed, and he wouldn't sell anything to us. So we had to romance the guy for 6 months at least. I bought, hamburgers for his dog, and came in and chewed the fat with him and all of that. And finally he relented. We were a bunch of nice lads. And he sold us the contents of the cabinet. And the contents of the cabinet were Gernsback Amazings, Gernsback Wonders, Clayton Astoundings, and a couple of rows of this little magazine called Weird Tales. Well, he wanted $150 for the lot, which had come out to about 50 cents a copy. And I got him back to the house, and we spread them out over the kitchen table, and we had to divvy up the loot. And I picked out all of the Weird Tales. And I had no idea why. But my mother came in. I had to borrow the money from my mother. This was during the war years. She was working in a defense plant. And she came out to see how I'd wasted her money, and she took one look at the magazines that I picked out, all the Weird Tales, and she turned pale. It seems that my daddy, who was deported to Canada when I was 2 years old, he, as I think I said in my little bio, used to sign other people's names to checks, to which I attribute my talent for writing.
But you always used your own name.
Yes, yes. He, during the early days of the Depression in the late 20s, he fancied himself something of an artist, and he would draw portraits of people from photographs. And while he did this, my mother would read to him from his favorite magazine, which happened to be Weird Tales. And when she came into the kitchen that day and looked at the table, I had all of the copies that she used to read to him from. I was 16. I had not, I didn't know my old man since I was 3. All of which convinced me this whole thing is genetic. But I'm a great condition freak, and I didn't know that that might be genetic too until I went home to visit my brother and his wife and son, Chris. And Chris was a comic book collector, and he was out in the kitchen with his little collection of Iron Man comics, and he was ironing the cupboards so they'd look new. And then I knew the poor kid, it's going to be hopeless.
Oh, that big collection you got.
Yeah.
Do you remember how much you paid for it, and how did it get split up?
Each of us had to pony up $50 each. He wanted $150 for the contents of the cabinet. There were at least 300 to 400 magazines in the cabinet, and they were all in primo shape.
You think any of those are still in your collection?
Things tend to turn brown with age. That includes people as well as magazines. And some of them probably are. Yeah, some of them probably still are. I've made a habit. I am a constant upgrader. For all those people who like to buy my discards have been forever grateful. But I constantly upgrade. And my own attitude towards pulp magazines in general we haven't gotten to that yet. I did branch out from science fiction. My own attitude towards pulps in general is I don't collect race paper. I don't collect stuff that's all torn up, that's shredded when you open the pages where the staples are rusty. The corollary to that is I never saw a mint condition pulp I didn't like.
Well, one observation, that dealer room out there is probably as close as we're going to get to one of those old secondhand magazine stores.
Yeah. The other side of that, which I haven't mentioned, most of the pulps at the time were printed in Chicago, either by Cuneo Press or W.F. Hall. At that time in history, the publishers and the printing companies would take full copy returns. They would either punch a little hole in the cover or they would tear off the front cover. Well, you had to do something with the body of the magazine. On West Madison Street, which was a really chunky part of the city way back when, they used to have these magazine depots that would handle all of the returns, and you would go in there and you would walk in and there would be pulps from the floor to the ceiling. Some of them, most of them coverless, but not all. Some of them had covers. And Golden Fleece was published in Chicago at the time. And all of the return copies of Golden Fleece came back to these magazine depots. And they would punch a tiny little star in the logo, and then they'd sell the magazine. And I used to buy complete sets of Golden Fleece at a nickel a copy. That's 45 cents for a set. And I'd give them to friends of mine. I mean, outside the little missing star, they were brand new. They were mint. And all I can say is if I had the brains God gave a goose, I would have bought them all, because I can't think of anything that has appreciated in value as much, as quickly, and as recently as pulp magazines. The last time I bought a set of Golden Fleece in primo condition, it was a bill a copy, $900 for the set.
If this was the Oprah show, we'd be handing out a set of Golden Fleece to everybody. That's in another life. Frank, what is the Slan Shack, or what was the Slan Shack?
Oh, Slan Shack. Most of you know anything about the history of science fiction know that there was a group in New York called the Futurians. And they were comprised of a group of would-be science fiction writers and artists, etc., most of whom became editors, agents, artists, and essentially ended up as the secret masters of fandom. In the Midwest, there was this little group in, of all places, Battle Creek, Michigan, called Slan Shack, and there were about 4 or 5 people there, and these were fans. They weren't writers or artists or anything like that. They were fans, and I used to go up and visit them sometimes. Let me see, Ali Suri from Chicago would go up there, Bob Tucker, a couple of times Damon Knight would show up, and they would throw conventions attended by all of 20 to 25 people. And for the convention, of course, they would go running to Ray Palmer in Chicago. And you understand, Palmer was a publisher of Amazing Stories, and Amazing Stories was strictly déclassé, except, of course, for the artists. So Ray, who had been a old-time science fiction fan, he would donate all kinds of interior and cover art to this tiny little convention up in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I swear it's true, you could buy, at times, you could buy interiors by Finlay for $5 to $10. You could buy covers by J. Allen St. John for the munificent sum of $25. And at one time, for those of you who remember your covers, there was a cover on Amazing Stories illustrating a Bob Locke story. And it has two little men, two little guys dueling with needles. And that was a blue background. And for a brief time in life, I owned that. But that was Slant Shack. Later on, they pulled up stakes, I think shortly after the war, and they moved en masse to Hollywood, where they promptly fell among actors, and the whole group disintegrated. But while it was going, it was certainly an intriguing and interesting place. Ken Kruger, an old time comic book guy, he used to show up at Slant Shack. And someplace, I still have photographs of Tucker and Ken, myself, Elsie John there, Al Ashley, Jack Wiedenbeck. They put out a fan magazine. Wiedenbeck used to do spray painted covers that were gorgeous. But that was Slant Shack.
That was all part of science fiction fandom. How much of it was social and how much was it involved with discussing stories?
Well, it was a little bit like the Futurians. They would tend to marry the passing women who came by and got sucked into the circle there. It was, I would say it was very social. And well, nobody talked about sex, so we didn't talk about that. The only thing that was left was to talk about the stories. And occasionally at these little conventions, like Doc Smith would show up, and we would literally sit at Doc's feet. We idolized Doc. And Doc would tell us the latest adventures of the Edoreans, and I forget, the Arisians and the Edoreans, and Doc wrote the Galactic, you know, nothing so prosaic as crashing planets or anything, he'd colliding galaxies, and he was sucked into the can you top this field of writing, and eventually his stories were really way out there in the blue, and even Campbell gave up on him. But Doc was a great guy. He was a great man. He was very generous to all of us acolytes, would sign anything we gave him. Terrific guy, terrific guy.
In 1943, you landed a job with Ziff Davis.
Yeah, I graduated from high school in '43. My first job was working as a copy boy at the International News Service in Chicago. I would pick up the stockyard reports in the morning. That's when they still had stockyards. And the guys who ran the teletype machines would send me out to pick up lunch. And that was when I found out that when they ordered a roast beef sandwich, they really didn't want it with gravy on it. And I was putting out Fan News Card Weekly at the time, a little postcard fanzine with all of the news of the day, the new books, what fan was going where, et cetera, travel. And the guy who ran it, a guy named, why I remember these names, I don't know. A guy named George Galati ran it, and he came around one day and saw my little postcard, which the first few issues of it were printed on a homemade mimeograph, for God's sakes. And he looked at it and he thought I was putting out a little tip sheet for guys going to the races. But then I forget who in the hell told me. I don't know whether it was Ronnie Klein, another fan that became an artist, did some covers for Arkham House. And unlike me, he had written enough to make a friend of J. Allen St. John, something which in retrospect I certainly wish I had done. But I found out there was this opening. I'd been up to see Palmer a couple of times. And one time I made my very first sale to him. I sold him an idea for a cartoon for which he paid me $5. I could see right away that there was big money in writing. But I went out there. It was during the war years, and frankly, anybody who was ambulatory could find a job. Even the stupid kid fresh out of high school. So they hired me, and my job was to count the returns of the magazines when they came in, which this was wartime, and that was real easy because the covers would come in, and I'd count out 100 covers and weigh them. And then I'd weigh the whole lot, and if there was 5 pounds, that meant there was 500 returns. They sold everything they printed. The only thing we ever got back were copies that had been destroyed in shipping. But I would mail out packages, ship back issues of magazines, and I discovered that they had something called editorial files, and they had complete files for the guys who originally owned Amazing Stories, including a complete file by Sidney Gernsback. And one by one, I stole the editorial files. I smuggled them out under my jacket.
I'm sorry I asked.
I'm a petty criminal, obviously. But a guy named H.J. Morgenroth was the treasurer of the company, and one time he got in the elevator with me when I was desperately pretending that I'd simply gained a lot of weight up here. And he gave me the fisheye all the way down. Man, I was sweating. I was afraid he was going to ask me to open up my jacket, and, you know, the 1928 volume of Amazing Stories would fall out.
Is that what they mean by pulp fat? Okay.
Oh, the advantage of working there is I got infected, meaning I wanted to become a writer. I wanted to become one of these people who used to come in and hold conversations with Ray Pullman and with Howard Brown, who was working there at the time. And they had a lot of time to spend with me because Ziff Davis had cut back on publication of the pulps. They didn't cut the size so much, they cut the frequency. So there were these two guys, and I forget who else was working for them, who put out a total of 1 magazine a month. And they had the longest pinochle games in existence going on up there. There was nothing else to do.
Was alcohol involved?
Yeah, I was 17, for God's sakes. The only time I ever drank alcohol was doing a war show in Chicago, and Echo Connor, my compatriot on Fan News Card, we went to a war show, big parade and armor and all of that. And I was 17 and I could do anything, so I mixed wine and beer and then chug-a-lugged it. For 2 days afterward, when Echo finally took me home and deposited me on the front steps, and my folks answered the door and took one whiff and put me down in the basement, and wouldn't let me come out until I had thoroughly vomited everything I drunk.
Next question.
We were just getting to the good part.
Well, you had gone from having a somewhat low opinion of Amazing to working for the company. Was there an adjustment involved there? Did you change your mind?
Well, Howard eventually became the eminence grease of Ziff Davis, and he had delusions of grandeur when it came to the contents of the magazine. And I sold a couple of things to Howard, but what really taught me wisdom was Bill Hamling had acceded to the throne. He was editing Amazing. By this time, I was writing a lot of stories for Imagination, and there was a quick check. And well, this is before he got Imagination, but we talked over a story one day, and replotted it in his office. And by this time I was in the Navy, so I loaded on board ship, and Senator Freddie Pulp, who was my agent. I did not give the story a title because Ziff Date has traditionally changed every title that anybody ever put on a story. Freddie got in the story at the same time that John Campbell told him, hey, I got a 12,000 word gap in the latest issue, you know, my upcoming issue, what do you got? And he shipped over an untitled story, which was the working title, and Campbell bought it. And this was a story designed for Amazing, plotted by Bill Hamling and myself. Bill, of course, was highly upset. I, of course, was delighted because Astounding paid 2 cents a word and Amazing paid a penny. But the next thing that happened was I thought for sure that everybody would be able to detect the influence of Bill Hamlick's Amazing Stories. They didn't. It came in number 2 in the analytical lab, and I was flabbergasted. I thought for sure you could tell the difference between the 2 magazines. And in the main you could, but not in fine detail.
And of course they didn't change the title though, did they?
No. Campbell never changed the title in his life.
So it went as Untitled
I
Story.
think he thought that this was a clever title.
Well, it sounds like if Picasso had written a story, it might be called Untitled Story. Or
Well, consider I was in the Navy, and the first I knew of all of this was when I was on leave, and I picked up this issue of Astounding, and there's an Untitled Story. That was the first I knew of it. I didn't dare show it to anybody.
and that one got adapted for the Dimension X radio show, and it went over the air as an Untitled Story also. To millions of people sitting by their radios.
You're about to hear Untitled Story.
Frank and Rob. Well, we know it's an important event in every young pulp collector's life when they pick up their first Weird Tales #1. When did you pick up yours?
About 30 years ago.
I've been collecting Weird Tales for a long God. I remember all of this stuff now that you would ask. Ask me what happened yesterday, I couldn't tell you. There was a guy at 509 North State. I don't know how many of you, I don't even know if the guy is still left. I think he sold dirty magazines out of the back room. He was selling Norman Lindsay portfolios, native Australian women frolicking in the bog. I think he had a couple of covers by St. John. He also had his first issue of Weird Tales. And he would let it go to me, because I was a good friend. He would let it go to me for $25. And I had to think about it. And it took me a while to accumulate $25. And that was my first issue. And I kept it for years and years and years until one day I made the huge mistake of loaning it to Bill Blackbird so he could make replicas of it. And Bill thoughtfully dismantled it and restapled it and gave it a new spine. There were only 2 things wrong. One, he didn't get the pages in the right order. Al Jan didn't find that out until he went to buy it from me. And 2, someplace Bill had found glue that never completely dried. It was the only magazine in my whole collection that had a sticky spine to it. But I was very proud of it when I got it. And it was very tough. Toughest issues of Weird Tales to get are the first. The second is even harder, and November and December of '24 are incredibly hard. The first 2 regular pulp issues. If you got those, good luck in getting the rest of the set. Go ahead.
When was your first published story? If you need a refresher. What was your first published story?
Oh, First published story was a little gem called The Maze. Came out in the June 1950 Astounding. I had written it for class. I was going to my undergraduate Beloit College, and I had tried to get a course in non-fiction writing, article writing. I didn't want to take a course in fiction writing for fear that I would find out really horrible information that I couldn't write. I didn't want to know that. Unfortunately, the non-fiction courses were full, and I ended up taking the fiction course. And the first story I ever wrote for it was a horror story called Clarence. And it was one of these things where they read the stories aloud in class. And they read Clarence aloud in class, and suddenly I became aware that the whole class was deadly quiet. And they were concentrating on the story, and I thought, this is what I want to do. I was a physics major. Anyways, for the same course, I wrote The Maze, and sent it into Astounding, and Campbell read it and liked it, but geez, he was all, he was completely stocked on stories of 8,000 words. So I showed his letter to my instructor, and he's smarter than I was. He said, why don't you take 2,000 words out and resubmit? So I did. And I was a junior at the time, and Campbell bought it. And for the next 11 months, I faithfully raced down to the newsstand to look at the latest issue of Astounding, and my story was not there. You understand, I had told everybody, my fraternity brothers, all of my friends, all of my instructors, I was now a published author. The story never showed up. Obviously, Robinson was lying through his teeth. It came out in the June issue on sale 2 weeks before I graduated, and I bought every copy in town and gave them away all over campus.
Are we talking hundreds of copies?
In the little town of Beloit, Wisconsin, I think they got maybe 2 dozen. And not talking about Los Alamos, strictly a minor depot.
Okay, you got out of you had a second stint in the Navy in the early 50s. You got out of college with a master's in journalism after that, and you wanted to get a job at a trade journal. Would you tell us what happened when you interviewed at Iron Age magazine?
Well, here I am, freshly minted with this master's in journalism. It never ever occurred to me to go to the magazines I really liked. I was going to go around, what the hell. I had worked at the steel mills during the summer, and I thought that I could combine my technical background with my fictional abilities, and I could make a good living that way. So I went to the Crane Company, which made flush toilets and stuff like that, and they looked at my resume and they said, what did you do between here and here? And I said, I was freelance writing fiction. I said, what? They would not hire me. So I ended up in a magazine called Iron Age, which was published by McGraw-Hill. They had a little Chicago office that would keep track of what was happening in Gary, Indiana, and with Inland Steel and U.S. Steel. And I went up and I applied for a job. And going through the same routine, and the guy's looking at my, poop sheet. He says, what'd you do between here and here? And I said, well, I was freelance writing. I said I sold some science fiction stories. And he said, gee willikers, I used to write science fiction. And I knew his name. He told me his name. And his name was Keith Bennett. And I was a fan at the time when you remembered the cover of every magazine you read, the title of every story in it, and the name of the author. And I looked at him and I said, you wrote The Rocketeers Have Shaggy Ears in the spring 1950 issue of Planet Stories. He sat there in absolute amazement. I was probably the only guy in the whole damn country that could have told him that.
Naturally, you got the job.
Naturally, I did not get the job. I found out later on, I told you 3 guys were working on it. And he was hot to give the job to me. I was obviously the guy he should hire. But the other two guys from the advertising department, part of your job working for Iron Age was to go on and interview executives in the steel and iron industry, etc. And when I walked in there, I was a poor student, fellas. I had a $1 sport coat and I had tennis shoes that flapped when I walked. And they took one look at me and thought to themselves, no way are you going to represent Iron Age, not if we have anything to do with it. So I didn't get the job. I did get a job at a Sunday supplement called Family Weekly at the time in Chicago. And the editor there was an ex-newspaper man. And I waltzed in and he looked at me and I said, you know, I got this degree from Northwestern, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could tell at one glance he was not at all impressed. And he said, can you write? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, can you prove it? Well, by this time I'd sold the powder. And I didn't say anything, I just shoved the contract across the table at him. He looked at it and he said, when can you start? And that was the first real writing, editing job that I had. The second one, a friend of mine was working for Popular Mechanics. Popular Mechanics was an independent magazine. They also published a pulp magazine called Wow, which you can occasionally see copies of, something about comics. H.H. Windsor Publishing. And they published Science Digest. And Science Digest was a condensation of all the science articles that appeared in Scientific American and elsewhere that were easily to condense because all you had to do was drop out the science. Like dropping out the dialogue and keeping the description. But Fritz Leiber worked there. And my friend, you know, said they were looking for somebody. And I went down and Fritz was the guy who interviewed me. And I really thought that this was going to be great. I was going to be working with Fritz. And I showed up 2 weeks later and they ushered me into Fritz's office. And this was going to be my office. What I had not known was that at the time, Fritz had a drinking problem and they had let him go. But in recompense, they had offered to let him interview his own successor. And for years afterwards, I really felt like crap because I felt that I had taken Fritz's job. And that was hard for me to handle.
Okay, in the mid-50s, you linked up with your old Zip Davis colleague, Bill Hamling, for the magazine Rogue, which was a competitor to Playboy. One thing that interests me is there was a lot of science fiction published by Rogue and Playboy. What was the difference between science fiction in the so-called slick magazines and what was in the pulps?
Damn little. Well, in the first place, it's a story, but Bill's science fiction magazines were on the rocks. Imagination, imaginative tales, space travel, etc. So we sat around his kitchen table one day and talked about, you know, what could be a replacement. And I had the witty idea, you know, the men's adventure magazines were doing great. Argosy, Mail, Stag, all of this. So I had suggested, and Bill concurred, that we would put out a Blue Book type men's adventure magazine, one to be called Caravan. Well, Hefner and Bill used to work in the same office, and Hefner had offered to introduce Bill to his distributor. Well, his distributor was a tubby little guy with a big fat cigar, and you know, you had the feeling he was left over since Prohibition days. He had two magazines. He distributed Playboy and he distributed a little vest pocket thing called Bear, B-A-R-E. So Bill has lunch with him, and Bill is extolling the virtues of this men's adventure magazine to be called Caravan. And this guy finally takes a cigar out of his mouth, looks at Bill and said, "What's it gonna be about, camels?"
This was
And-
before Lawrence of Arabia.
And Bill, who was a lot faster on his feet than people gave him credit for, he thought of Rogue. And he sold the guy on Rogue. Now, you understand, this was not what Hefner had been expecting. Hefner had been expecting, Bill had told him about Caravan, and all of a sudden, Hefner discovers there's another girly magazine in the house. So he trots down to the distributor, he says, "Okay, you can publish Rogue, but under certain conditions. 1, it can't be on slick paper. 2, there will be no full-page cartoons. 3, there will be no foldouts." And for, about 3 years, Bill did that. He put out a magazine that was close to his heart, that was printed on a hard surface newsprint, and he filled it up with a lot of science fiction at the time, including a lot of stories by Harlan Ellison, etc. This is in the old room. Well, eventually Hefner sold his distributing franchise to somebody else, and the guy at Bears suddenly realizes the only other thing he's got in the house is Rogue. So he gave Bill permission to throw Rogue slick and put in full-page cartoons and gatefolds and all the good stuff. Well, Bill had always been a science fiction man. That was his background. When Hefner started Playboy, a couple of the first issues reprinted science fiction stories from imagination. This is before he picked up Ray Russell and started to buy his own stuff. The difference in quality between the science fiction material that appeared in Rogue and that in Playboy was not one of quality, it was a matter of editorial taste. And I got together with Ray Russell, who was the fiction editor of Playboy for a long time, and we discussed this because my old friend, Charlie McNutt of Chicago, had changed his name to Charlie Beaumont, had hit Esquire, was writing for Twilight Zone, and was selling stories like mad to Playboy. But Playboy didn't buy everything that he submitted. We were the salvage market for Charlie. And I once asked Ray about this, and Ray said, most of the stories that you guys bought, I could never understand why we turned them down. So I don't know why. Another time, I was walking down the hall and I ran into A.C. Spektorsky. And Spektorsky was the big high mucky muck at Playboy when it was selling 7 million copies and making newsstand dealers rich. And Spek knew that I came from the science fiction field, and he complained bitterly to me that guys like Ted Sturgeon was submitting all of their stuff and getting paid 2 cents a word from fantasy and science fiction, and why in the hell didn't they ever submit anything to him and get a couple of grand? And Playboy, in essence, published 2 kinds of stories. They published little-known stories by well-known authors, and they published what I prefer to call well-written pulp. There was pulp magazine authors, myself included, Charlie, who had started in the pulps, Ray Bradbury, who had, and some others. And that was what they liked. To show you, I told you about Untitled Story and all of that, who was writing what. I moved out to California one time. I was in Los Angeles, presumably working for Hamlin, but I ended up managing a magazine called Gallery. And I thought, gee, really, because by the time I wrote something. So I started writing a science fiction novelette. And I had found the first 2 pages of it, literally at the bottom of the trunk, forgotten I had written them. And I was sharing an apartment with a guy named Ward Liebscher, and I remember calling up Walt. I had the upstairs, he had the downstairs, and I remember hollering down at him, and I said, Walt, give me the name of a planet. And he said, how about Xerxes? And I had just written it. I just typed Xerxes down. And I was flabbergasted. I considered that a very good omen. Later on, I moved to, I finished it up when I was living on my uppers as a latter-day hippie in San Francisco. And I sent it to my agent, once again thinking that, hey, John W. is going to be delighted to get this. You know, it was written specifically for Astounding. And the agent sent it off to Playboy. And they bought it. And I just couldn't believe it. It was 18,000 words. Once again, they said it's too long, cut it down to 15. I cut it down to 15, and you understand I'm living in a garden apartment, which is practically a basement apartment in Frisco, 60 a month. I desperately need money. And the agent calls me up and he says, we're having trouble with Playboy. And it seems Playboy bought all rights to material. And if you sold something to them, on the back of the check would be a printed listing of all the rights that they were buying. And it would take up half the back of the check. The film rights, the radio rights, the foreign rights, everything. So the agency said, with your permission, we're not going to cash this check until they change their policy. And I took my courage in my teeth, and I said, why? Sure. So Playboy thought they owned the manuscript, put it in type, and they were on press before the agent called up and said, hey, you don't own that story. And that was what changed the policy. I mean, for anybody who sells stuff to Playboy these days, you owe me. But, you know, you asked me what's the difference between Slick and Pulp, and depending on the story and the author, damn little. In fact, to bring this down to the immediate, a lot of the magazines out there, a lot of the very early issues of Blue Book and Argosy and All Story and stuff like that, there was no difference in the fiction that Cosmopolitan ran, or Argosy ran, or Metropolitan, or Pearson's, or some of the others. It was just editorial whim. And if the author didn't manage to sell it to the Post, Cosmo, he sold it to Argosy, Popular, or Blue Book. The stratification of fiction as to quality did not come in until much later. And even then, there were exceptions. Hammett was a pulp writer. C.S. Forster, who later on sold all of his sea stories to the Post, originally sold them to Argosy. And I already told you about Bradbury before he sold Mademoiselle and Esquire and Point Ceased. He was selling Dime Mystery and Planet stories.
Frank, in the late 50s and 60s, then, you had a quote-unquote real job as an editor. What were you doing collecting-wise during that time?
I wasn't doing anything. When I was working at Vogue, I considered myself no longer a science fiction person, no longer a fiction writer as such. I had a full-time job, it paid well. I had other stuff to do with my evenings rather than sit behind a typewriter. And I certainly wasn't collecting old magazines. The collection was boxed up, and it was in storage, literally. And I don't know what pulled me out of that. I think Bob Weinberg was largely responsible.
Thanks, Bob.
I was buying, is Bob here? If he's not, you can tell him later on, he's responsible. I went over to see Bob to pick up, he was selling a lot of science fiction books and magazines. And he had this beautiful collection of adventure magazine. I'd never ever seen adventure. And I started looking at it and I fell in love with the covers. And that was it. And eventually then, a couple of years after that, I ended up at Pulp. And the rest of
There's no turning back.
I thought I died and gone to heaven. I walked in, took a look around, and I thought, oh my God. After years of looking, this is where I belong.
Frank, I think most of us are familiar with the Great Wall of China, the Berlin Wall, Pink Floyd's The Wall. But could you describe the Great Wall of Pulp?
Well, look, and I'm speaking to the whole audience here, and this is from the heart, fellas. Most of you, certainly not all of you, a lot of you are very fond of certain authors and the Pulps and all of that. And you will buy the magazines that contain your favorite authors, and you will develop a fondness for the magazine. A lot of collectors, and we all know who you are, will buy a magazine depending, you buy it because you love the cover. The cover is evocative. You buy Spicy Mystery because you really like those covers. Please don't tell me that you cut into the magazine and actually read the stories. I think highly of you for buying it for the covers. Al Janus accepted. Anyway, I got tired of seeing so many people's collections, like dropping in to see Daryl Richardson. Come out and see my collection, Frank. So I go out and see his collection, and what am I looking at? A bunch of spines. All lined up. All the spines look alike. There's nothing attractive about a spine. Not mine, not yours, and not the spine of Odyssey or Adventure. They're all essentially dull. And
There's a few colorful ones.
well, I decided when I collected that, hey, I bought these damn things for the covers, I'm going to show the covers. So in my living room, some of you have been there, others of you have seen photographs of it. All my beautiful treasures are out there for everybody to admire, to faunch over, to steal if they can. Depending on your age, to confuse them with comic books, God forbid. But, yeah. I mean, what the hell? Why are you buying these things? To put them in a box and put them under the bed? I remember going to a comic book convention one time, and the guy was selling art. He was selling original pages of Crazy Cat. And his pitch was, these things accumulate in value. You buy this page of Crazy Cat, stick it in a vault, take it out 30 years from now, and it'll be worth a fortune. And sitting back there thinking, you take a piece of art, you stick it in a vault, and then you pull it out 30 years from now to look at. I'm sorry, fellas, a lot of you are doing the same damn thing.
Okay, well, let's get down to specifics here. How wide is the Wall of Pulp?
How big is your collection? I mean, is it real big, or is it,
I had this conversation earlier in the evening. I think it was you.
We'll talk later.
Well, no, you won't. Anyways, the shelves, they are 9 high. There are 9 magazines high, and they are, let me see, 5, 10, 15, 20 magazines wide. There are 4 individual cases. And then there's kind of a smaller case that is only 4 magazines wide that is the same height. And on that, I have managed to squeeze Spicy Mystery, Spicy Detective, Popular Engineering, Thrills, all the Burroughs Argosies, a Black Mask, the one with the Maltese Falcon, Chandler. I mean, all the good stuff is out there to be admired by the populace. College stories, cabaret stories, red-blooded stories, tales of danger and daring, all of this stuff. And it's great. I mean, I can walk in there once a day and figure that my life has not been misspent after all. I don't know how many of you can say the same.
Purely from my own curiosity, Frank, an innocent question. How many long comic book boxes do you think it would take to pack all your pulps up?
Wait a minute, let me go get my pen.
If I was to show up at your house one day, for example, when you weren't around, how many boxes do I need to bring?
Wait, are you counting the backing boards? 'Cause that's worth a couple pulps a box.
Is that how you keep track of your collection? Boxes that will fill up?
He just wants to know how portable.
I can testify it'll fill up a lot.
Well, it's still coming back to size again. That's,
I think you're aiming up to a personal question I'd rather not answer. Good.
Well, let me close with this question before we open it up to the audience, although we seem already to open it.
Opener of the way.
Is it true that you wrote and put together Pulp Culture simply so that you could put in a photo of the wall of Pulp as the end paper on the board?
Well, let me see. Between the Pulp Culture and the science fiction book, I managed to get in a photograph of my collection, a copy of Les Zombies for which I had spray painted the front cover, a copy of Fan News Card, which I had told you about, photographs of all my recent books. And I deeply resented the guy who wrote in and complained that this was a peon for Frank and Robinson Incorporated. Pulp Culture. I should tell you a little bit about this. I realize we're running over, but you might as well know. A guy named Larry Davidson, who was a book buyer at Cody's in Berkeley, stopped by the house one day and he looked at the wall of pulps and he said, "Gee, somebody ought to do a book of these." By this time, I had discovered the new Canon copier, which at that time, before then you had Xerox copies. The Canon machine would make an almost exact replica of the front cover. Before then, I would say, nobody's going to photograph these things. I mean, what are they going to do? Tear off the covers and do a drum scan, like one guy wanted to do, whose name I won't mention to begin with. So with the Canon machine, I thought, hey, this might be possible. So we Lawrence started shaking down all of the book salesmen who came to Cody's, and I started duplicating, making Canon copy duplicates of the better, the more valuable issues and all of that. And we accumulated 250. I wrote 20,000 words of stimulating prose. And Larry had found a possible purchaser in Abbeville, which is the popular culture arm of Abrams in New York. And got my agent to handle it. The editor at Abbeville was very put out that a regular literary agent was handling this and that he was held up for 10% of cover, etc. And they were going to publish the book. And it was going to be a $25 book, about 112 pages, 250 images reproduced from these Canon copies. And that's the way it was until the guy at Abbeville got this wonderful idea of putting out a book devoted to snow globes. Now, do you people know what snow globes are? And he was going to sell it by putting a little plastic snow globe on the front cover. A little plastic that would be filled full of water, have snow, and you could wiggle the book and, it would snow. Brilliant idea. So he started shipping those out, and they would be packed into the box. And the book dealers started getting into these sopping type books because the bottom 5, the snow globe, would explode. That was the end of the popular culture line for, that was the end of Abbeville at the time. So then I had my agent in New York who was highly adverse to schlepping around a huge box of Canon repos. So we got another guy, we got a friend of Larry's to do the schlepping. And nobody in New York was interested, we saw everybody. I went to 10 Speed out in Berkeley and a Tina Brown knockoff. Tina was the British editor of The New Yorker for a while. About, 45, a figure to die for if you're female, and complete with accent and attitude. And she said, this would make a great calendar. And I looked at her and I said, I don't think so. Whereupon she got all huffy and we left. Then we tried Chronicle books, and Chronicle books, they loved it. There was only one thing wrong. In the pipeline at Chronicle was something called Danger is My Business. And the art department at Chronicle wanted to hang on to the repos. They loved them. The guy who ran it, the heir to the Chronicle newspaper fortune, he was a word man, and he loved the wordage in Danger is My Business. I can't comment on the book, I've never read it. So we were stuck with all of this, and then a pulp magazine collector and dealer whom all of you know, Bill Trojan, knew this publisher in Portland, and the guy in Portland was publishing little chapbooks of pinup pictures, and he expressed interest. So by this time I had around 400 repos, so we boxed them all up and sent them to him. I said, you can choose any 250 that you want. And he called me up and he said the magic words, and I remember these to my dying day. What he said was, I like them all. I got a fish. So his first idea was, let's go first class and we'll do drum scans. And I said, what do you mean by a drum scan? Well, this would involve tearing off the cover, wrapping it around. And I thought, oh Jesus, what a great idea, and I can't do anything. And then John Gunnison was in on it, and I believe it was John that suggested to this guy that we could do digital scans without ruining the magazine. And I ended up shipping, oh God, shipping carton after carton of old magazines, half of which I had borrowed from my friends and neighbors in the collecting industry, to Baltimore for scanning. And then one horrible day, I called up John, and I was shipping everything second day, because you don't want to leave these things out in public too long. And I'm shipping stuff out second day, and I said, hey John, did you get the latest box? And he said, geez, no, I didn't. And the next day I call him up and he said, you sure you sent them? I haven't gotten anything. And UPS was not exactly efficient back in those days, so I'm running around, trying to find out from UPS. I get completely paranoid, I can't sleep at night. I literally called up all the secondhand magazine dealers in the city of San Francisco, and I said, if anybody shows up with all of these great looking pulp magazines, they're mine. And then 7 days later, they showed up at John's. What had happened was a little airmail sticker had somehow rubbed off the box, and they shipped them ground. But it's the heart of my Weird Tales collection. It was the heart of a lot of people's collections. And there was no way you could insure that stuff. There's no way that you could replace it. Impossible. You couldn't do it.
Well, let's call that a happy ending and open up for questions.
No, I'm not going to say anything about size.
That was my question.
Yes.
Yeah, I got
You're gonna have to repeat
Um,
my words.
do you have a favorite Ray Palmer story you could tell us? I tell you, I collected everything he's ever published, and his editorials in other worlds in the early 50s really turned me on. Do you have a favorite Ray story?
I got a couple of great stories about Ray. Ray was a true original. He was a little guy. He'd been in an accident when he was a kid, and he was badly hunchbacked. He stood about maybe 4.5. And if you see, the famous photograph is Ray at one end, then Bill Hamling, then Howard Brown, then me.
That's in All Our Yesterdays?
Yeah, I think so. And it goes right up the hill. Anyways, Ray was the world's nicest guy, one of them. Bob Locke was the world's nicest guy, but Ray was a close runner-up. And Ray and I would frequently talk about writing, and I gotta admit, Brown had an interest in Raymond Chandler, thank God. He also had an interest in collections of morgue photographs, which I made the mistake of thumbing through at one lunchtime.
More photographs?
Yes. How did they find the body? But Ray told me a couple of rather valuable things, and one of them was if the story ever starts to slow down, drop another body through the skylight. And I just finished a novel and sent it out to the agent front part of the week. And while I was writing that, I had occasion to remember that from Ray. The other thing, generous, good-hearted, kind Ray, knowing that I wanted to meet the great and the near great, would frequently invite me out to the Friday night poker games at his house in Evanston. And I regularly lost my salary. Ray also, I got one of these back. Ray, as a fan, Ray had put out this collection of stories by Weinbaum, Stanley Weinbaum. And I forget the name of it. Dawn of Flame and other stories. He had some of those left. And he was selling them to me at $15 a pop. You understand I was making $25 a week, but this is too good a deal to pass up. Those are all the nice stories about Ray. There was another side to Ray, and you have to understand, to appreciate it, you have to understand the great wheel of fate and how long Ray had been at the bottom of the karma. When God was giving out karma, he didn't give much to Ray. And in some of the poker games, not the ones I was at, I heard that this was apocryphal, and I got it from Bill Hamlin. Ray would get half drunk at the poker games, and you understand, all the writers were there, and they were all on what they call a draw. That is, Ray would guarantee to buy it. He was publishing 4 or 5 magazines a month, huge size, consumed a lot of fiction. And these guys would be on a draw of maybe 30,000 words a month or something like that, which meant that they would be making $300 a month during a time when $300 a month was nothing to sneeze at. But Ray would cheat at poker, and then he would dare guys to catch him, and they knew better. And Ray would also, and this happened to, I guess it happened to Bill McGibbon and some of the other people, Ray would look around the table and he would say, I bought you for $47. He remembered the price of the first short story that he had bought from me. But, as I say, you have to remember that Ray, all of his life, it had been a horrible life for him. During the days of the Depression, he was this crippled kid, and the only way he could make money was by copper sheathing church steeples, because nobody else would do it. He would occasionally sell, I had letters at home, which I meant to give to you, by the way, where Ray is writing about selling stories to the confession magazines, some of the confession magazines. when they hired him at Ziff Davis, they didn't give him a salary to begin with. They paid him a commission because they didn't trust his ability or anything.
Based on circulation.
Yeah. Well, what happened was, at the time that Ziff Davis bought Amazing, it had never intended to buy Amazing. It was a technical house, popular science house, and it wanted radio news. And Amazing was just part of the package, and they didn't know what the hell to do with it. And Ziff, incident nobody knows this practically, William B. Ziff, founder of Ziff Davis, he used to be an advertising rep in Chicago, and if you look in some of your weird tales back in the mid-20s, you'll see little ads for William B. Ziff, ad representative or whatever he was. Anyways, it was Ralph Milne Fowley who suggested they hire Ray, saying that Ray knew everything there was to know about science fiction, which is probably true. So they did, and at the time they bought Amazing, it had a circulation of 18,000. That was pretty small for a pulp back then. And Ray's first issue, one, Ray stumbled into an outfit that's being printed over at W.F. Hall. Two, he's stumbling into an outfit that has one of the greatest art departments for technical art in the country. All of these guys were adept with airbrush, fancy machinery, Bob Fuqua, Macaulay, Tillotson, some of the other guys. And Ray later on discovered that, hey, J. Allen St. John is still alive. But Ray's first issue sold 35,000. It doubled circulation. Within 3 or 4 issues, he was monthly. And within 3 or 4 issues, they figured that on a commission basis, he was making more money than B.G. Davis. So they put him on a regular salary. His brightest thing, I thought, Ray ever did, I told you he had discovered J. Allen St. John, still in business. And fantastic adventures had been large size. Then it went to small size for 3 issues, and they were going to fold the magazine. But the very last issue, due to be folded, the very last issue, Ray bought a cover by J. Allen St. John with a primitive man with his axe on top of this great-looking dinosaur flying or walking or whatever it was doing. But it was pure cut. It was pure J. Allen St. John. And that issue literally flew off the newsstand. The master was finally back in Pulp magazines.
What was St. John getting paid for those, you know?
I have no idea. I strongly suspect that they were probably paying him standard rates, and I suspect at the time standard rates may have been a bill or two a cover. Everybody starved to death back then. But St. John was St. John was teaching at I think it was Chicago Academy of Art. I don't know if it still exists. And he was an instructor there, and that's where Ronnie Klein met him. I think Ronnie was going to school. And I had a friend who was also a would-be artist and had gone to Chicago Academy and had St. John as a teacher. St. John, I understand from what he had to say, suffered from Parkinson's towards the end until the brush touched canvas, and then he was steady as a rock. But Palmer later on, he had published a couple of St. John paintings, and he ran them on the back covers of Other Worlds. And the last canvas that I know of that St. John did was a Pygmalion cover. The statue of the girl who's turning into a human being. And out of the goodness of my heart, because I was the dumbest bastard on God's green earth, I gave it to this friend of mine who had had St. John as an instructor. Later on, he did something, my friend married this 16-year-old young girl whom he knew, moved up to Wisconsin, got himself a farm, and they lived happily ever after. And I tried to buy the painting back and he wouldn't sell it.
Is it hanging on his living room wall?
I don't know. Probably happened to burn for that. Any other questions?
Well, Ed
But I
Hulse
told
is
you.
getting antsy back there.
No,
He's a trigger finger.
I told you everything that's interesting about me. You've been a great audience.